All right, man, hit it. You're muted, Santiago. Go ahead.
Hello, and welcome to another Monday night lecture at the Explorers Club. My name is Santiago Pardo Sanchez, and I'll be your host this evening. I'm a member of the club and also a managing editor of Mapping Past Societies, a digital atlas project out of the Initiative for the Science of the Human Past at Harvard University. Tonight, we have a great lineup, but before we begin, it wouldn't be the Explorers Club if we didn't have an update from the field. Last Thursday, after an almost 7-month journey, NASA's rover Perseverance reached the surface of Mars to begin its mission. Here to give us a quick update and tell us more about it is former NASA astronaut and club fellow, Mike Massimino. Mike, take it away.
Thanks very much, Santiago, and hello, fellow explorers. Boy, I really miss everybody. Haven't had much contact, of course, with as everyone else, but it's nice to be able to get here virtually with everyone. I miss going to the club and hearing about what's going on. So hello, everybody. Thanks for having me. I did not have anything particularly to do with the rover except to cheer for it, but I did get asked to do some media, which is I think why you guys asked me to do this today. But the rover seems to be doing really well. An amazing voyage. It takes a long time to get to Mars, obviously, and you can only go at certain times because our planets are in different orbits, so that when you have to go when they're closest. And so that's why they 3 missions were launched at around the same time for Mars 2020, one by the US, of course, and in the UAE and also China. So as I think probably most of you know, the one from the US arrived on Thursday at Mars and successfully landed, which was a pretty challenging landing. They wanted to go somewhere interesting. Not that the other places they have gone to Mars have not been that interesting. They have been, of course, but this is particularly interesting because it's a dry lake bed. They think it was about the size of Lake Tahoe billions of years ago. And it dried up as just about anything that else might have been on the surface of Mars did. But it seemed to be a very interesting place to go because there may be signs of water there and maybe some fossils or maybe microbial life underneath the surface. But because just like when we were exploring the moon, as they got more ambitious of where to go, the more interesting places also corresponded with the places which are harder to land. And you didn't have a pilot like we did with when we landed on the moon, when Neil Armstrong and all of our fellow members who were part of the Apollo program landed on the moon. Now we didn't have anyone on board, of course, going to Mars. So a lot of that had to be done autonomously. The time delay in one direction to Mars is 11 minutes. So it's really, you can't, it's undoable to have someone pilot it from the ground in real time. So a lot of AI was involved, a lot of autonomy to get it on the ground on Mars. And that was pretty amazing that worked. And then all the advanced technology already is showing signs. I guess some of the sounds were recorded already, but were kind of inaudible, but hopefully we'll get more interesting things to listen to. But certainly the pictures look great. What they showed of the landing itself. Now we can put cameras everywhere in today's world, right? So the landing itself, shots from here we go, that Kevin's showing for us here. Pretty amazing to be able to follow along. And right from the get-go, we started seeing images as soon as it got on the ground, even before it got on some of the pictures from before it got on the ground. So some of the interesting things it's going to do, it's going to deploy a helicopter. It'll be the first aircraft to fly around another planet in controlled flight. That's pretty cool to get a helicopter to work in that thin atmosphere, but they apparently figured out a way to do that. It's kind of like a drone sort of, it's going to fly around. And that'll be great because rovers traditionally move very, very slowly. You see those rocks all around there, that boulder field, the rover can negotiate a lot of that, I would imagine, but rovers also have a tendency to get stuck if they move too quickly. So, and again, there's no one to push them out of the hole. So they're going to be moving really slowly. And when you can get something airborne, it can go a lot further and survey a lot of the area much more quickly than the rover can. So that's a great advantage that it has. It's also going to be, as we said, looking underneath the surface. There's a sample return mission that's probably going to take about another 10 years to complete. Another spacecraft will go there, another lander to pick up the samples, and then they're going to actually launch off of Mars. This is years in the future rendezvous with a spaceship in orbit and then bring a sample back. And that whole thing, and then from now, it's going to be hopefully about 10 years or so from now. So this is a long-term mission. They're also going to be looking at ways to keep life sustainable once we get there with people. And that's, I think, maybe most of us as on-hands explorers are looking forward to seeing us put a person there at some point. So they're going to be looking at, is there water there? Is there water that could support human life when we get there? And also transforming some of the atmosphere, particularly the CO2 that's in the atmosphere, into breathable oxygen, because you can't bring everything that you need. You want to be able to resources there. So that's why this particular spot is very interesting to explore. So I think there's a lot to look forward to, and I'm sure we'll be getting updates and hopefully some really cool discoveries. Even if the thing finds nothing and just collects some data, that'll be cool. But if it comes up with some evidence of microbial life in ancient times, that certainly would be something.
Thanks for that, Mike. When do you think we're going to have a member of the Explorers Club up there? And is it going to be you?
No, it's not going to be me, I don't think. Technology is moving not that fast. But I don't know. There's Joe Lindgren, who's a current astronaut, is a very good friend of mine. And it was about I don't know, 4 or 5 years ago, he was visiting me in New York, and they were picking a new astronaut class. And he said, Mass, can you believe it? This new class of astronauts we're going to pick, they're saying they're going to be going to Mars. They told us we were going to Mars. I go, Joe, I was picked, 25 years ago, they told me one of us was going to Mars. If you look at our astronaut class patch, it has the space shuttle on it and the space station, which still wasn't even built yet. And then the moon and Mars, we thought we were going there as well. So, what I think is, I think we need to get moving. But with this, being able to do everything we've learned, a lot has happened, though, of course, in those past 25 years or so since I became an astronaut. And we know how to keep people in space for long periods of time. I think we're going to be going back to the moon, hopefully within the next 10 years, and learning about what it's like to use some of at least the dirt to build stuff on the moon, and how to maybe create atmosphere and regenerate water, but also do with rocks and a little bit of gravity and dust and so on. So I think there's a lot more to learn. And so my answer is, I don't know. The answer was generally like 15 years. There's something interesting about 10 to 15 years, Santiago, because you say we're going to do it in 10 to 15 years. That's not as far in the future where people can say, oh, okay, well, I'll pay attention maybe. But it's also not that soon that people will be paying attention. So they've been saying 10 to 15 years, I think, for the last 40. And that's going to be my answer, I guess, somewhere between 10 and 15 years. But I think we are, no kidding, getting closer. I think also with these other countries being involved, and with the success that SpaceX has had with getting us to low Earth orbit and building a larger booster that can go even further, I think that maybe there is real hope this time. I don't think it's something that one government can do by itself, and maybe even a series of governments would have a tough time pulling off. But I think with the successes we've had with with some of the commercial companies, and particularly if Elon Musk has got plans to go there, I have no reason to doubt that person and the people that work at SpaceX and some of the other companies as well. So I really do think that we are in a situation here where everything's coming together, and certainly I think you're at 10 to 15 years, I think it's certainly possible. Hopefully back on the moon in 10 and people on Mars in 15. That would be what I hope. From 20, let's count from 2020. That's a nice round number. So by the end of the decade, let's get back to the moon, and midway through the next decade, we should be on Mars. I would certainly hope.
Well, Elon, if you're listening, don't worry. I kept 10 to 15 years in my calendar free. So give me a call. Well, thank you, Mike. And I think I speak for everyone when can say we're all really blown away by this achievement, and we can't wait to follow along with the progress. Now, for today's lecture, it's called From Data to Understanding and Back Again. And the word data really gets tossed around an awful lot, and it can mean different things to different folks. If you're sending data over from Mars, there's a 7-minute delay, but thankfully tonight, the delay is going to be as good as your Wi-Fi. But it's my pleasure to introduce two guests who are experts both in the art and the science of making sense of all that data. John Nelson is a cartographer and experienced designer at Esri. He creates maps and related web experiences and the occasional experimental cartographic technique. He frequently writes and speaks about this creative process and holds an MS in Geographic Sciences from Central University. And our second guest is Keith Van Graafland, who is a principal product engineer with Esri in Washington, D.C. He serves as the ocean content lead for the ArcGIS Living Atlas of the World, a long-term project whose emphasis is on visually appealing and useful map information. In his role at Esri, he's responsible for curating, developing, and implementing ocean-related content for the GIS community. Before we begin, I invite the audience to stick around after the lecture for a Q&A session. So feel free to send in your questions ahead of time in the chat. But now, without further ado, I'd like to turn it over to John and Keith.
Thank you, Santiago. Appreciate it. First of all, it's an honor. I mean, I'm sure I speak for Keith too, to be chatting with you all and get to nerd out on data and what it means and how we can push it forward and gain understanding from it. And I'm excited to be able to talk to you guys today virtually, but I feel like I see a light at the end of the tunnel, I can see like maybe we're going to be meeting in person one of these days in the not too distant future. And I look forward to that. But in the meantime, I'm happy to be sharing with you virtually.
Thanks, John. And I'm Keith Van Graafland. It's great to be here as well. Excited about tonight's presentation and talking to the Explorers Club about vessel traffic in particular, and how John and I work together to bring together some data to fruition to hopefully help out the marine spatial planning world and bring and gain better understanding of what's going on in our oceans.
Yeah, and like Santiago said, Keith and I both work for Esri. Esri is a global map tool making organization doing a lot of good in visualizing and spreading data and geographic capabilities. And specifically, we work on the Living Atlas team. And the goal of the Living Atlas team is to make data accessible to everybody. So people like Mr. Massimino, who we just spoke with, and rocket scientists who might go to Mars, and right on down to school kids who are using our products and some of the data that we make available in their school projects, which is, frankly, it's stealing a living, and we're having a blast doing it. And it's a lot of fun. We love it. We're having a good time. So we are going to talk about the journey that data takes all the way through to understanding and what that means and what it might look like. And we're going to show you just oodles of examples, because who cares about text? You want to see some pictures and some maps. And so do I. So I'll just dig into some of the examples. When I look at an image like this, which is SpaceX launching Falcon Heavy, it's easy to focus, of course, on the subject of the photo, which is that big old rocket, right? And all the energy, it's blasting off into space. And it's easy to overlook the fact that it took this much fuel to get this far, right? And that's kind of the point. And it's okay to focus on the subject of the photo, but it's also nice to have some context for all the effort and all the energy that underlies the ability for that rocket to go, 60 meters high. And in a lot of ways, data in its journey that humankind pushes it on and adds structure to it resembles a pyramid. So Richard Saul Wurman is a really interesting thinker of our time. He actually started up the TED Talk series, and he was the first information architect because he invented the term information architect, which is a great way to get a title, is by inventing it. And he said that data has this journey. So we take data and we just put lots and lots of energy into it, and we build up this framework that makes it more and more valuable. And it resembles a pyramid in that you've got this massive amount of data at the base, and that supports enormous efforts that can transition that raw data into information, something that human eyeballs can look at and say, oh, okay, that's a thing, I get that. But then we use that information to ask questions and investigate and pique our curiosity. And we start building up a repertoire of knowledge. We get it a little bit. And the more we know, the more we realize how much we don't know. And once that set of knowledge is expanded on in any field, especially in the geographic fields, you get the sense of wisdom, and it's understanding. I understand that I need more data. I understand how little that I know. I understand what questions I can ask. I get a better sense for the phenomena that my maps are representing. I can see structure where I wouldn't have been able to see it in the past. So my colleague Keith here conceived of a really interesting initiative to make data more accessible and more beautiful and more available to everybody. And he's gonna chime in on that. You're muted, Keith.
Thanks, John. One of the interesting things here, AIS data is also vessel traffic information. It's made available by the U.S. Coast Guard, BOEM, who is the Bureau of Ocean and Energy Management, and NOAA through a website called Marine Cadastre. And these data are transmitted from vessels. So here we're looking at a vessel with an antenna. It's transmitting a VHF signal to a tower that's maintained by the Coast Guard on land, and telling it, over a series of seconds, what its position is, what its speed is, how it's maneuvering within the ocean, what class of vessel it is, and even its draft, so how deep the keel clearance is, all the characteristics that are important to understand vessel traffic and how a vessel is moving through the water. So these are very useful information for marine spatial planners. In this era, we've got lots of things that are happening in the ocean, whether it's SpaceX wanting to land a rocket that they sent off and collect it, or a wind energy project that's happening offshore. There's all sorts of marine spatial planning uses that are occurring in the ocean, and having this data to understand and deconflict potential users of ocean space is monumentally important. So going along with that, this is the Marine Cadastre website, and you can see where you can obtain this information. So these vessel traffic data are made available by BOEM, as I mentioned, in yearly downloads, and they're available as CSV files. So the limited files, in this case, we have one file for each day of the year for the entire United States, looking at 2020 in particular. And as you obtain this information, each one of those is about 800 megabytes. So this is no, small tabular chunk of data. They start to grow as the collection increases, as you want to understand what's going on over time. So what that means is about 275 gigabytes of these tabular format files. An Excel workbook is pretty much a CSV file over time that make up an entire year. So it starts to, not only do you have to download this information, you they're prepared for your package for you and zip files. You have to extract them. And, before you know it, you're running out of drive space. Really just trying to take a look at the associated data, and much less, bring it to fruition and see where it lies spatially. So, over to you, John, about what is done with these Excel files once we download them, and you're on mute as well.
Thank you. Thanks, Keith. So on my screen, you should see an Excel table. So this is the CSV. I just downloaded the most recent CSV that's available. CSV just stands for comma separated value, and it's sort of a generic way of sharing tabular data. And it's a nice kind of software agnostic file format, and Microsoft Excel supports it. If somebody opens a CSV by default on their machine, most of the time they're gonna it's gonna open up in Microsoft Excel. And here we are in Microsoft Excel, and you can see that there's a bit of information. So there's a lot of categories of information here, but there's just an immense amount of rows. These are instances. Every ping that a vessel has sent to a transceiver location, ping, 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 all the vessels in the United States for that whole day. It's insanity. I've opened this up in Microsoft Excel, and it's 824 megabytes, and Excel is doing its very best. But even Excel is like, hey, I can't open all of this. So it's just opening a partial view. So right away, I mean, the CSV is limited to 1 day, but it's still too much to be opened all the way in a very common tabular piece of software. But nonetheless, I'm going to just show it to you and introduce you to some of the categories. You've got latitude and you've got longitude, which to map nerds like Keith and I are like magic. And I'll circle back to that in a little bit. But it's got stuff, like Keith mentioned, its width, its draft, its direction, its heading, its bearing, that kind of thing. Now, if you've done any kind of data viz at all, maybe you're slightly familiar with a pivot table. So a pivot table lets you like free yourself from the tyranny of rows and columns as they're delivered to you in a table. So I'm going to select some of these columns of data, and I'm just going to say, let's insert a pivot table and slice and dice this in different ways and try to gain some understanding from this. Now I could say, well, vessel type, which was a category, but let's make that rows. And it automatically shows me all the distinct vessel types, which are number coded. And then I could say, well, instead of all of these attributes as columns, let's just pick one of the attributes, which is, let's say, transceiver class. And I'll put that in as columns. And then I'll just drag a value down in here like a dummy. It'll count up all the instances of vessel traffic for that day. Okay, right away I can slice and dice, and I'm trying to push data into information. I'm trying to understand what I'm even seeing. What do I do with all this? How do I aggregate this? How do I count it up? And again, map nerds like Keith and I like to color in. We get paid to color in. We make maps, and the first thing that a map person wants to do is break out the crayons and start coloring in their maps, right? So we can do the same thing here. And I'll go to the Home tab, and I'll do what's called conditional formatting. And I'll choose, boom. Now it's color-coded. This is essentially a map. It's just a grid view of a map. I can immediately see that vessel category 31, whatever the heck that is, category B, is by far the most frequent sort of ping event that we're getting in this AIS data. And maybe we can ask some questions about that. My first question would be, what's vessel category 31? But anyways, I was looking at pivot tables like this, and I want to show you something kind of evil and sneaky, which is my favorite sort of data viz. And I'll clear all this stuff out. Now, I was thinking one day, okay, slicing and dicing in a table. When we think of the Earth, the way that we encode how up, down, or how northeast, southy something is by something called latitude. And I remember latitude by the fact that you can climb up and down a ladder. Latitude, ladder. And longitude, I remember because it's the other one. So I'm going to grab latitude. And what is latitude if not up-downiness? And up-downiness just means rows. So I'm going to drag these into the rows. And the way latitude works is the equator is 0, and it goes up for the North Pole. So I'm going to reverse this sort to largest to smallest. Then I'll grab longitude and pull this into my columns, because what's longitude if not left rightiness, right? Longitude, east leftiness, east rightiness. It's just left rightiness. Woo. And I'll grab one of these guys in and just give it a dummy value. And instead of sum, I'll just say count up all the instances within each latitude and with each longitude. And I'll make these a square. And I'm going to grab this whole crazy pivot table. And like I said, I like to color in. So let's make this background black and dramatic and cool. We'll make the font nice and small and kind of gray. Okay, and now let's color in. So we'll do some conditional formatting. And instead of just a 1 color scale, I'm going to do 3 color scales because I'm feeling crazy. I know Keith supports this. The lowest 10 percentile, I'll make this deep kind of purple. The mid-range, I'll make, let's make it like aquatic blue. And the highest 10 percentile, I'll make this like bright yellow. We'll hit OK. Then I'm going to zoom out. And what I've got is a pivot table. This is only a simple pivot table in Microsoft Excel. But what is it really? What is this? It's a map, right? We've accidentally tricked Microsoft Excel into making a map out of who knows how many gigabytes of or megabytes of data of vessel traffic for the term of 1 day around the United States. Now, why am I showing you this? Well, would it be amazing? Wouldn't it be amazing if we didn't have to use a tabular tool to play with this data, right? Of course, there are more appropriate and better tools to kind of parse and aggregate and summarize data. I'm not suggesting that you grab AIS data and start making maps in Microsoft Excel, although I kind of am because it's a lot of fun. But the reason I'm showing you this is because geography is special. Geography is different. Latitude and longitude isn't just another format. It's not just another number. It's its own dimension. It's a spatial dimension. And geography finds a way. Geography is so special that I can trick Excel into making a map, and it doesn't even know it's a map. It only becomes a map when it lands in my brain, and I'm like, this is geographic. I'm looking at a geographic representation. So I'm going to kick it back over to Keith, who will bring us back into the real world.
Thanks, John. That was fascinating and some excellent Excel work, I might add. Those good folks at Marine Cadastre, so that website that I showed earlier, they really pioneered the way for mapping this AIS information, turning that data into vessel tracks. And they started developing tools to support this that would work within the Esri platform. So what we're showing right now is ArcGIS Pro is what's up on my screen. It's a GIS. It's a geographic information system for turning this tabular data into spatial information that we can gain understanding from. So Marine Cadastre is not in the practice of developing software, right? Esri is, and they've built tools that really pioneered the way for marine spatial planners to understand this vessel traffic information and not use Excel to work up those daily CSV files and a conglomerate location to manage that data, visualize that data, and then perform analysis with it. So within ArcGIS Pro, we have along the right-hand side here, we see this geoprocessing toolbox set. We've got hundreds of tools that are available out of the box that allow you to visualize and understand information. One of the tools that we use in order to convert those CSV files into tracks or points, and then consequently tracks within our mapping platform is creating a big data connection. So these CSVs, they're all structured the same. So the attribute field names at the top of those CSV files is very consistent. They're all structured the same. We're able to take that structured understanding and point a tool at all of those files, so 365 files for a particular year, or in the case of 2020 that they made available recently, there's 182. So they made the first half of the year available up until June, the last day in June. And we can say all these data files have the same schema, which is the field header rows are all identical. Let's make them all look exactly the same, and let's bring that in to see what those points look like within a spatial mapping platform, within a GIS. And that's what this tool does, is we create a big data connection, we give it a name, and then we specify that source folder where we downloaded those CSV files to, and it'll go through and create this big data connection for you. At that point in time, you have the ability to turn those points. So the really interesting thing about the CSV files is each vessel is not recording at exactly the same interval. So if you were to like make a density map with the points, there would be gaps in it. Some vessels are collecting 4 points a second. Some are collecting 1. Some are collecting 8. So to be able to connect that information together as lines is what really needs to be done in order to see track lines of where these vessels are navigating within our ocean. And this tool, Reconstruct Tracks, which is also in the Geoanalytics toolbox, allows you to do exactly that, and while carrying over the specific attributes or characteristics of the ship, its movement pattern that you're interested in. So in this case, we're running this Reconstruct Tracks tool. We're splitting each track by the day that it was collected in, and we're producing a set of track lines for the entire United States. And this is what that looks like once you zoom in to a particular area. This map here is demonstrative of the Port of Long Beach, just to the southeast of it, and what these different traffic patterns look like on a particular day. So here we're looking at April 30th of 2020, and these are all the ships that were in that area on that particular day.
You know what this looks like to me, Keith? It looks like a plate of beautiful, beautiful spaghetti. And this is kind of the example of, well, you take these massive piles of data and you invest all this energy and thinking into kind of blowing off the dust and revealing the structure that's underneath it. But that structure can be overwhelming. So I look at this and I'm like, oh my goodness, there's like 35 different colors. There's maybe literally a million lines I'm seeing coming in and out of the Port of Long Beach here. And honestly, you can't really make sense of it. What you do see is I'm gaining the fact that there's a lot of traffic. You get a sense for the overall flow of things. But what I need to do in this case is take it another step. I need to start parsing this out and separating these and making it approachable to an end user, democratizing it, because already this is still very big data. It's been converted into lines and it's color coded, but there's still lots and lots of it. And there's a lot of effort that goes into taking it that next step, just another 60 meters worth of rocket fuel to get it a little bit higher,
Yeah, that's exactly right, and John, and that's where we really started talking about is how can we increase value of this vessel traffic data, given that we have a platform, given that we can process this information. There's not a ton of people out there that have the patience, time to go through the archive. So Marine Cadaster's historical archive of AIS data goes back to 2009. To process this much data and then start to be able to understand what it means and unlock some of those patterns. Let's say you manage a small little area inside this map that we're looking at that's a marine protected area, and you've got a little laptop that you're trying to process these CSV files with. It's not an ideal environment to run these tools and work with that raw data, even though all those best practices in the published literature is out there on marine cadastre on how to do this. So that's where I believe we saw the biggest opportunity, is how do we bridge that gap between what these data products are that marine cadastres are making available and actually creating an information product. And that's where John and I had the opportunity to work together on a vessel traffic application with one of our colleagues, Jinan Zhang. And we built an application to start to be able to understand not only the vessel traffic, but what the different groups are and of that information and how it can be collated together to increase that understanding that you spoke about earlier. So in this case, we have an application. We're looking at the entire United States, as well as some of the outlying areas. It goes up to Alaska as well. And we've got the data broken into several vessel groups. In this case, we're looking at cargo. We can also look at patterns for fishing. Military is in there. There's also passenger. So these are passenger vessel patterns that are occurring throughout the US on June of 2020. Pleasure vessel traffic, tanker. These are the tanker ships with fuel and other things that are loaded on them that are moving and making their way into some of the major ports within the United States. They are very large ships that don't have the feasibility of making it up a riverine system. They have towboats, right? These are the workhorses of our fleets. That this is actually category 31, John. So this is what those 31s are: is all the towboats that are out there operating within the United States. And then there's a whole slew of other vessels that get lumped in here. These are your research vessels, your survey vessels, and other vessels that kind of lumped into this catch-all category.
So when I look at these, the first thing that I think of is sidewalks. So we've taken that data and we've pushed it into an information product, and because it's taken the form of an information product, I can start recognizing things. I can look at patterns. I can see structure, and it makes me think of other phenomena that I might want to compare it to. Right? Analogies that I can communicate around. And I think of college campuses. So you've got these official sidewalks that are paved. The planners said, we're going to put a sidewalk here and we've got a sidewalk here. And we've got this easement. And we're following all these legal rules and we're avoiding utilities and everything. And they invest all that money in pouring cement. And then the students just want to go from here to there. And they're going to take the shortest, easiest route possible. And that's the difference between a plan and the actual use of something. And in the real world, you've got examples of both, and that kind of takes the form in this data too. So sometimes an organization who's in charge of a campus like that might take the initiative and say, okay, you know what? Good job, everybody. You're finding efficiencies. We're going to go ahead and pave these desire paths. They're called desire paths or desire lines. It's a really interesting topic. We're going to go ahead and pave these things. And, here's an image. Up next is an image of everything kind of in a like paved in beautiful brick, but you can tell they're ad hoc and they were originated as desire paths.
Can you share your screenshot, John?
Oh, sure. Yeah, so here are the desire paths. This is an organization who actually embraced that and said, okay, we're going to adapt to these masses. Now, sometimes you can't do that, right? Sometimes there are real reasons and safety reasons and precautions that you have to take, or you have to take a firmer hand in managing traffic for who knows why. And you might actually prescribe paths and say, actually, no, we need to prescribe this path. Normally you can just branch out and go wherever you want. But as for this part, we're gonna stick to the rules and everybody follows this path. And so I find that this information product in the form of these vessel tracks kind of reveals like this secret structure of economic geography. You've got official prescribed paths, you've got desire paths, and everything in between. And you can start asking some really interesting questions. You see some fun examples, which Keith and I are about to show you loads of pretty fun and interesting examples.
Thanks, John. So that brings us to our next point is, how do we make this data available once you have the opportunity to explore it? And, we've worked up the points, we've turned them into track lines, and then we want to make the download, the experience for someone to obtain this information really easy. So what we've done is we've broken up the data into these different areas. We've got 4 different areas, or you can download the data set by the current month that you have selected within the application. In this case, we've used NOAA's electronic navigational charts, or ENCs, to hover over a particular area, and it will prompt you to go through a download process once you get that, and that data that you download then just transfers right into the ArcGIS platform, where you can do a number of different analysis to really gain additional understanding, not only of where these were in time, but how often are these patterns occurring, where are areas that are increasing in traffic, where are areas that are decreasing in traffic. There's just so much potential for these tracks now that they're built up. So here we can see these white boundaries. So here we're looking at the level 1 charts, which are really the broad scale charts that are made available by NOAA. So it's like the entire west coast of the United States, the entire Gulf of Mexico, the south coast of Alaska, Hawaii. They're all their own polygons or boundaries that you can download and select these data for. We also have level 2 charts, which are those kind of inset charts that live inside the level 1 charts that provide a higher level of detail about what's going on from a regional perspective. And you can see those boundaries here, and that download experience is exactly the same as I described. And the same thing with level 3. You get even to a tighter area. So this is someone that might not be interested. They manage a very small area. They manage a port, and they want to know how much traffic is going in and out of that particular port. And they want to do an analysis within our desktop ArcGIS Pro. To do that, they can go to one of these particular areas and just download that smidgen of data that they might be interested in. And then, within the riverine system, right? Once the data comes to some of these major ports, we're still using marine traffic, vessel traffic, to distribute it throughout the United States, particularly between, the Gulf of Mexico and the Great Lakes. We have a great engineered river system there that moves goods and products all up and down, whether it's to our railroad system for distribution or just to transportation hubs up and down the Mississippi, Missouri, Ohio river systems. These are being used on a daily basis by towboats that are pushing up and down commerce. So these are areas that we've kind of encapsulated to provide those additional levels of analysis for people to go and obtain the tracks, the information products to do more value added on their own time. And once you click on one of those areas, it gives you an idea of how big a file is. So this is downloading the entire data set for June of 2020 for the entire US. So if these little polygons that we've chopped up and sliced and diced the data up by don't work for your needs, then you can download the entire United States by month and go through and pick out the different dates that you might be interested in and do the same thing. So lots of options for going through and downloading the data for increasing and gaining additional understanding other than looking at the patterns. So, you know, what John did to describe where traffic patterns happen, we're doing within this application. And, you know, people don't have the time to take the CSV files, map them up just to see if there's data there in an area that they might be interested in. So we're trying to bridge that gap to let them know that, yes, there's data here. This is what it looks like. And then if you want it, you can obtain those tracks as well to do additional analysis with. Imagine working up some of these CSV files only to find that there was no data in your particular area of interest, and you went through all that work. So we think that there's good value in providing this visualization application and download options.
So how about some examples?
Yeah, go ahead, John.
Oh no, yeah, no, go ahead. This is we're looking at the Gulf. Do you want to walk us through some of these examples in the Gulf?
Sure. So this, the Gulf of Mexico, right? This is the epicenter for oil and gas activity offshore within the United States. There's all sorts of work that's ongoing there. Here we can see some fascinating patterns. And as I mentioned earlier, that other category is kind of the catch-all for the industry-related survey vessels that are out there. So here we can see some interesting patterns. I see a couple offhand that look like they're running survey lines. Here, as I flip into a particular area, we can see these are actually this. You know, this is a vessel called the Hugin Explorer. So I'm able to click on that line on that particular day in March of 2020. It gives me the characteristics of the vessel based upon that AIS information. So here we're looking at the Hugin Explorer on March 28th, 2020. It's 85 meters long, so it's no small vessel. 19 meters beam, so that's how wide a vessel is. And then its draft is 6.2 meters. So it's a little bit over my head in depth. And it's traveling about 4.5 knots on average for this line segment. And I can tell, you know, just by knowing how some of this stuff happens, this is probably a vessel based upon the patterns and the wide turn angles that's going on right here, that's towing something behind it. You know, it's probably a seismic vessel that's towing something behind it that is trying to understand what's going on below the surface of the seafloor. And the same thing for this ocean project. This has a tighter line spacing. They're making more abrupt turns. This is probably a survey vessel that's running multi-beam, that's just mapping the surface of the seafloor to understand what the depth characteristics are a little bit more. And it gives me the exact date and the length and width characteristics of this particular vessel as well. Wouldn't it be great if you could click on a button and find out more about the vessel? And you can. So at the very top of the identification information for the vessel, there's a little magnifying glass, and I'll show that again here in the next example, where once you click on that, it brings you to a Google search that identifies based upon the MMSI ID. So that's a unique identifier for a vessel. In the name, it brings up the most likely Google return of what that vessel is. And here we can see a vessel that is owned and operated by Oceaneering. And this one is definitely an offshore ocean survey company. And that's very indicative of those patterns that we were looking at for that multi-beam survey. And this happens over time. So you can see all these different patterns occurring from month to month, and you can go and click on a particular vessel and you can start to gain an understanding of what is actually occurring at that particular location. So this is not, things happen. We have government vessels that go out there and explore these areas, and they're doing fish stock surveys, right? They want to know how much fish are on these areas to where they can calculate what fisheries to open, how long to leave them open, and have an understanding of what's out there based upon biomass that they're collecting. You can see those types of vessels. The NOAA Pisces is one of them that frequents this area, and start to see where they're going and how often they're going to these areas to understand more. In this case, you can see a vessel, a pattern off of the Cape here, where this particular dense pattern is really interesting. It caught my eye, and I'm like, what is going on there? That looks like it's a little bit too tight to be a bathymetric survey. What could that possibly be? And as you click on that information, you get characteristics that tell you it's this Acadiana. Apology for the mispronunciation. And then it tells you exactly what's going on there. So here on September 15th of 2018, we can see what the Acadiana is doing offshore there. And this was actually a vessel that's doing dredging utilities, related activities. So they're taking material off the bottom and pumping it on to these beaches for beach renourishment, or moving it to a different area. It's sand transportation that's going on. And this magnifying glass icon next to the name of the vessel allows you to go and explore that and understand a little bit more about those characteristics and see a picture of that and make that inference of, oh, that's exactly what that vessel does and what's going on. Here's that Pisces vessel that's owned and operated by NOAA that I was just talking about. So they're going around to particular areas and looking at what's going on. And if I were to click that magnifying glass, it tells me exactly, what the Pisces is, what it looks like. And it's just taking the name and the MMSI ID information and performing a Google search, and we're able to, see what these things look like and transform our understanding. So John, you want to talk about this a little bit?
Yeah, sure. So you're looking at an image somebody took from an airplane, maybe United, looks like a United wingtip. And you can see this enormous number of vessels all converging on one spot. Now, when I think of transatlantic shipping, it seems like the Wild West, or I suppose the Wild East, depending on where you're standing at any one time. But it's just a massive ocean. But in reality, you've got some pretty directed traffic. And these are very large vessels. And the whole reason AIS exists in the first place is to prevent these massive ships from ramming into each other, right? It's so they know where they are and they know where everybody around them is, and they can plan on navigating these. And so while sometimes it can just look like a flock of birds whizzing around, really there's a tight plan for these very large ocean-going vessels. And instead of just randomness, you've got some pretty well-defined passages that these very large vessels can navigate within. And here's an example, and Keith can probably talk to it better than I can, but here's an example showing cargo vessels. And you get some really distinct spider webs happening here. And these happen to correspond with shipping lanes. Do you want to talk about that, Keith?
Yeah, sure. So here we're looking off of the Port of New York, right? So you see these patterns of cargo vessels and you're like, why are they coming together in these, traffic lanes? Why is this happening? And really, once you enable this nautical boundaries layer at the very bottom, you can start to understand that it's not because there's all these floating buoys and markers that are out there. There are buoys and markers out there, but mariners and ship captains have these charts on their screen, on their display, and they know to stay within these areas because it is managed space, just like managed airspace from an airplane perspective. And once you click on these, you're able to understand that this is a shipping lane. So they're separating the incoming and outgoing traffic using this traffic separation schemes to provide a safe environment, for these incoming and outgoing vessels. And that's really important from a safety perspective and how we avoid, lots of these collisions within our waterways. So here they also have restriction areas. So you can see a speed restriction area because of right whales right here off the Rhode Island Sound. And there's also other areas where it's a precautionary area. As you're coming into those shipping lanes, take caution. Or this is another shipping area, lane area that's merging with another shipping lane area. Be careful. It kind of gives you an idea of to take caution within certain spaces. And these are all over the United States. So we're just using New York Harbor as an example. And I should say all over the world, there are global charting products that are out there that and provide this information to mariners and boat captains. And then different areas to be avoided. So up here off of Nantucket Shoals, you can see that there's no traffic that's occurring within that box. And why is it? It's because it's an area that's been deemed to be avoided by the Coast Guard, by NOAA. They've all worked together to block off these areas and to keep them managed.
So Keith just talked about all these rules and all these planned shipping lanes and all these directives that the pilots of these massive vessels are tasked with obeying. But best laid plans, right? I mean, look at this example. You've got a path and the barrier is down. This is where you're supposed to be driving. Oh no, you can't drive here anymore. But obviously, people find a way. They're going to find a way around the security. Sometimes borders exist, and then you see a phenomenon adapt around that border. I mean, this is a very natural cycle in economic geography. And one of the more fascinating examples that we saw when we were poring over this data is this weird pattern of passenger vessels kind of closely sitting off the coast. They shoot out and then they just hover and sit there and hang out. Now, what's going on? Keith, you want to let us know what's going on? We're all dying to know.
Where there is a jurisdictional boundary, there is opportunity. As you mentioned, there is an opportunity, and in this case, it is an economic opportunity that is being leveraged. So here, as we enable the nautical boundaries, we can see the federal state boundary that's occurring here in this dash dotted areas. Hopefully, most of these vessels that we're about to talk about always went just past this before they engaged in their activities. And, what we're talking about is the big M casino, so these are vessels that are going offshore to get away from state mandates, and they're taking part in, something that is federally okay. They're casino ships going offshore, taking people out of Myrtle Beach and have a onboard gambling that's legal once you get offshore here. And here we can see what that vessel looks like, the big casino, and we've all seen them. So
Keith, I've never seen them. I
with my binoculars. So here, John, you want to take this one?
Yeah, sure. So pivoting over, I mean, you talk about jurisdictions and requirements and mandates. Now, sometimes there are boundaries that are set and you can just go just past those boundaries, but sometimes it's more of an altruistic, we're all in this together kind of boundary. Like preventing the spread of coronavirus and COVID-19, and the restrictions that were put in place as a result of trying to suppress that person-to-person spread of COVID-19, this wacky, crazy 2020 that we just experienced. And that manifests itself really directly in this data. So here is a shot of the Juneau area, Juneau, Alaska, and the panhandle of Alaska. There's no road into Juneau. You have to take a boat or you have to fly into Juneau, Alaska. And there's, of course, all the international travel restrictions that have happened in our countries over the last year. This is 2017, May of 2017, vibrant, bustling passenger traffic. Here it is in 2018, same story. 2019, very few changes. 2020, boom, an abrupt, precipitous decline. And really, you only have essentially passenger service ferrying locals from one locale to another in a very short distance, just crossing that canal. I mean, you had this massive amount of traffic, and then it's just gone. And you see this all through these border communities that are fed with vessel traffic and commuters on passenger boats, particularly in areas where Canada and the United States touch each other. And there's a lot of overlap in the economies of those locations. It's a very difficult time for those people, a lot of people, but especially them.
And you definitely see the same thing in the Caribbean as well. So I mean, here looking at Puerto Rico in 2018, and just the transportation of these passenger vessels between Puerto Rico and the British Virgin Islands. And as you make your way through 2018 to 2019, everything looks copacetic. And then into 2020, they've really cut off that transportation, particularly between countries. So there's still transportation that's occurring intra-country, but once you start to talk about international borders, we don't see that traffic happening anymore post-COVID, post-pandemic. Here off the coast of Tampa, right? So Tampa is one of the largest cruise terminals in the United States. And, consequently, they've got 6 different terminals that can accept passengers. And that's a logistics, thing where they've got a lot more than 6 cruise ships that are coming and going within a day or two. So here we see Tampa, and we see these, in March of 2020, we see these irregular patterns that don't show up in previous years in March. Where there's just like ships that are circling offshore. And, these are cruise ships. So this is the brilliance of the sea in March of 2020. That's literally just waiting to figure out what they're going to do once COVID hit the United States and they had passengers on board that were impacted. What were they going to do to quarantine? What were the procedures going to be once we hit the dock? How do we handle this? And so you see just circling these areas between, this is March 20th, still doing circles. March 18th, here's the Carnival Paradise. March 19th, the Carnival Paradise, still doing circles offshore to figure out what to do. The Celebrity Summit, the Norwegian Dawn, these are all cruise ships waiting to come to port once we had an idea of how to manage this. Same thing with the Rhapsody of the Seas.
Yeah, and in that vein, when you think of queuing up and you've got these thoughts about health and how do you mitigate the health risks and even risks to the overall physical environment, how does that manifest itself potentially in this information when it's presented this way? When you turn on tanker traffic and you zoom in on some very large port areas, particularly petroleum exporting ports or very large cities importing a lot of petroleums because of refinery locations there, you see these sort of strange pockmarked things going on. Like, what is that? What is going on here? You know, here we are outside of Corpus Christi, and here we are at another location, and you see all these kind of ringlets, and what these are very large tankers waiting in line. They're waiting in their queue. So there's only so many locations available at the port at any one time. And so tankers will arrive and they have to sit there and wait. And while they wait, they idle their very massive diesel engines. And there can be potentially a lot of fumes. And this can be an impact to air quality impact that might not necessarily be accounted for very directly. But if you're living in a high population area that's quite near a very busy port, and you've got these massive diesel engines idling at just about all times of the day and night, that can have an impact on the local air quality. So this is an example where one phenomenon gives you an inclination to ask questions about a totally different phenomenon, right? So international tanker shipping, what does that have to do with rates of asthma in port towns, right? Well, maybe it does. And this sort of visualization helps you ask better questions. Here we are in San Francisco Bay. And here's Bellingham Bay in the Pacific Northwest, north of Seattle. You see some very tightly defined anchorage rings here where large vessels are idling, waiting for port.
This one I find really interesting, John. So these are tanker ships. So these are probably very large vessels carrying crude oil, and they are just sitting right just north of Padilla Bay National Marine Estuary Reserve, which is like a lush aquatic location with seagrass, with oysters, with shellfish. So it's just interesting to see the relationship between the environment and this terminal for unloading crude vessels. You know, think about the impacts that something like that could have in this area without having proper regulations. So it's interesting to see this phenomenon mapped, and the patterns that you're seeing there, the circular patterns, are incoming and outgoing tide cycles when a vessel is anchored in a particular area. So they're sitting there waiting, whether it's for clearance or for a terminal to open up to go and unload. And they're waiting with these gallons of barrels, whatever you want to call it, of product with, you know, neighboring these aquatic preserves. So I this is an impactful visualization for me.
Yeah. Again, it's a good example of how bringing information together gives you insight between different phenomena. So you've got shipping traffic for tankers, and you've got an environmental concern. I mean, it's the same here. We're looking at a glacier, right? And glaciers in the northern hemisphere, of course, are in precipitous decline. And here we are in World Imagery Wayback. So an application available from Living Atlas is the World Imagery Wayback. It shows you the historic versions of Esri's imagery base map that people use as the background to their maps. But if you kind of have the ability to go back in time and see what it looked like 3 years ago, 5 years ago, 6 years ago, you can kind of have a little time machine. So here is that Columbia Glacier, which is a popular tourist destination for nearby Valdez. So I visited Columbia Glacier from Valdez in a boat when I was a little kid in 1984, and then again in 1987, and then again in 2001. And every time the difference was drastically different. And that was a long time ago. So here we are looking at Columbia Glacier in 2014, and here it is in 2015, and now just 2019. You can see this rapid change that's happening. Now, sometimes a phenomenon can happen more quickly than you can update your imagery cycle. So there are a lot of imagery opportunities out there, but let's say, you know, one phenomenon is a little bit more fast moving than a different phenomenon, or perhaps less expensive than one phenomenon. And you can compare those. And right now we're seeing in 2017 that that boat traffic visiting Columbia Glacier from Valdez is already kind of overlapping what was shown in that imagery. So these boats go as close as they possibly can, and maybe a little closer to these glaciers. And you can see the ice calving. They even fish out little chunks of ice, and the kids kick them around on the deck of the boat. But you can see here that boat is along the edge of the glacier, and the glacier has receded further than you're even seeing it in this relatively recent base map in 2017. And here's that line. And in 2018, it goes even deeper. In 2019, it goes even deeper. I mean, these are very obvious increases in distance that the boat has to travel to reach the edge of that glacier. And here we are in 2020. Now, because of the impact of travel restrictions due to COVID, we have fewer lines, but the lines that we do see go to right about here. And so you've got one phenomenon with maybe a more high temporal resolution informing and bringing context to a different phenomenon, in this case, satellite imagery. And you can supplement some intelligence from one into the other, and the two give each other context. And so that's navigating the natural environment as it changes. But of course, we navigate the built environment, and we use these riverine systems. And the Army Corps of Engineers has done just Herculean efforts in making the Mississippi navigable. But of course, there's only so far that one of these massive boats can go upriver, right? I mean, the Mississippi River can't accommodate these super deep vessels all the way up to Minnesota, of course. And so at a certain point, cargo has to change hands. And like Keith said earlier, it changes hands into the domain of tugs and tow vessels that push these big barges full of stuff up the Mississippi to be delivered. You know, this is the footprint. This is the spider web of commerce. This is physically what you're seeing. And if we look at this map of the Crowfoot estuary around New Orleans in southern Louisiana, you can see these large cargo vessels winding their way up the Mississippi River, but they end pretty abruptly. So let's take a closer look and see how far they get. You know, they get this far. This is how far that these massive cargo vessels can go because of, you know, just practical limitations for the waterway. And then the tows take over. And look at just the glowing white hot electric activity of these tugs doing their work, pushing barges up and down the river. And Keith said these are the workhorses. Just this past weekend, I was visiting my father, who lives right at the edge of the Straits of Mackinac. So I live in Michigan and he lives in Michigan, and there's two peninsulas of Michigan, and where they nearly touch each other, there's a very narrow strait of water called the Straits of Mackinac. It's actually a very important shipping channel for traffic that comes in and out of Duluth and Chicago, and it gives access to the canals and the St. Lawrence Seaway out to the Atlantic Ocean. So very important, very interesting, very busy place. And here it is in the summer when it's especially busy. And well, guess what? I was there in December, and look, it's actually still ice free, and traffic flows. You know, there is actually a pretty steady stream of shipping traffic through these Straits of Mackinac, even in December when it was very cold. But you can't trick old man time forever. He's going to catch up with you eventually. So last weekend when we were there, I snapped this photo of the Straits of Mackinac, and that's the Mackinac Bridge there, Mighty Mac. And clearly there's a lot less traffic, and specifically two bits of traffic. So when we arrived in February, you can see historically traffic grinds to a halt. Here it is in 2017 and 2018. Nobody's getting through typically in February. 2019, nope. 2020, couple ships got through, and I actually witnessed some of this year. I saw a tugboat coming through, and it was an icebreaker actually, and it was clearing away, zipping back and forth, clearing out a safe passage for a tanker to come through, and that tanker made it through. And the next day I saw the same thing, but this vessel just wasn't able to make it. And I saw them approach the Straits of Mackinac and stop. They'd back up and they'd give it another shot, couldn't make it, back up, give it another shot, couldn't make it. It was iced over and they had to turn around. And that's actually pretty expensive and bold and daring, high risk sort of thing. But, you know, people make those gambles and say, well, let's go for it. In this case, it didn't pay off.
Thanks, John.
Yep.
So that all these patterns that we've seen, they're, you know, you just talked about a pattern, right? There was a pattern between the icebreaker and the tanker, you know, so maybe a towboat and a tanker that had a relationship. We've really just focused on looking at one of these patterns at a time. But what I find, you know, extremely fascinating is the interconnectivity of one vessel group with another. So what is one, you know, where one leaves off, like the tows, you know, where the cargo vessels could only make it up the Mississippi to a certain point, the tow vessels take over, and understanding that relationship and what's going on is really important. Here in this example, we're looking at the entrance to the Chesapeake Bay. And these choke points that we see are the 2 points where the bridges turn into tunnels, and they allow the ships, you know, those larger ships, to be able to have passage through. And what we're looking at here is tow. But what is really interesting is looking at these actual cargo ships. So these these massive vessels come in this area that's on the northeast side of the bay. They've got an anchorage area, and you could see where these anchorage patterns show up. And what happens in this particular region is we have pilots that actually come out and board these large cargo vessels, and they take them into port. So there's a union that pilots that come aboard. You throw a ladder off the side of your vessel, they climb up and they say, okay, I'm going to take it from here, and they bring your vessel in. And so what we see here is these cargo vessels. And then if we switch the layer over to our passenger vessels, we can see these passenger vessels that are coming over from the shore and boarding on to these cargo vessels and taking them in to the particular port or slip of that, for that matter, of interest. So they take liability of the vessel at that point in time, and they know, they're masters of these particular waterways, of exactly how to get between point A and point B, and that's their job on a daily basis. And I find this interaction between the cargo and the passenger system in this particular area, as well as others, very, very fascinating to look at. So here we had the Paradise Point came out, got on board through a ladder. The cargo vessel threw a ladder overboard. The captain climbed up, said, "I got it from here," and took the massive, 80-meter vessel into cargo vessel into port.
So I grew up on the glacially scraped flat tundra locations of central Michigan. And in the summertime, we would have these just great big flocks of birds just rise up from a field after gleaning it. And they would form these just amazing, intelligent, wispy clouds of life. And each bird is acting somewhat autonomously, but they're part of this really beautiful emergent flock that happens. And the movement looks like a single organism. Now that concept is called emergence, and emergence just means you've got loads and loads of seemingly unconnected, self-interested agents. But when you step back and view them in massive quantities at a broad scale, they start revealing structure for the environment that they live in. And it belies some intelligence about the world that they're operating within, even though each individual speck doesn't necessarily care a whole lot about the other specks. but when seen in concert, you start to see these really beautiful patterns. And that's especially apparent with the fishing category here. So we're looking at fishing in the summer of 2020 off the east coast of the United States. And if you didn't have a bathymetry layer for this base map here, you would still know that there was an abrupt continental rise right there, because the fishermen boats are coming out and they're hitting the fish and they're going back, because that's what the phenomena is happening right there. You've got some, what is it, upwelling from the yeah, let us know, Keith, oceanographer.
Oh yeah, you've got currents that are colliding in this particular area, and you've got upwelling from the Gulf Stream that is going against the continental slope, and it's a productive area. You know, as a result, nutrients are getting pushed up in the water column, and you're going to have more fish in that area.
Yeah, it's beautiful. It's just beautiful to me, the way that the activity of an individual fishing boat times 1,000 traces out so delicately the edge of that rift. It's just gorgeous to me. And now here we are on the West Coast, same kind of story. You've got the seasonal fishing activity that happens in the spring and the fall for salmon coming up. And again, even if we didn't have bathymetry information, you could almost trace the exact location of the edge of that Astoria fan's abrupt rise there as it approaches land. We've got kind of a weird orientation. I've rotated the map a little bit, but fishing is this really kind of beautiful emergent phenomenon, and it's very linked with seasons and the seasons that our Earth goes through in 1 year. So you can see the retraction of fishing vessels in the wintertime and the kind of rapid expansion into the Gulf of Maine here and the Georges Bank for fishing in warmer seasons in the summertime. And again, kind of breaks back to this retracted area of fishing closer to shore. And really what you're seeing here is an echo of the underlying phenomenon. And that underlying phenomenon is the fact that we have seasons, right? You're seeing one phenomenon, which is fishing boats, chasing another phenomenon, which is the seasonal location of fish, chasing another phenomenon, which is temperature-driven food as a result of the ocean cycles, because our Earth has a 23.5-degree axial tilt as it circles our home star, which I think is kind of beautiful if you think about this kind of whirlpool of phenomenon that are all echoing this larger order structure of our slightly tilted shared home. Now, we've shown you a cajillion examples of these things, and hopefully they were kind of interesting. They're interesting to us, and there's so many more to see. But the reason that we're showing you this is, again, to reinforce this concept of data being pushed forward into an information product, and then an information product inspiring knowledge. But then knowledge is no good unless it's acted upon, right? And you gain a sense of understanding, and you have some wisdom that results after that. So you've got data, information, knowledge, and then wisdom. And it's no different when making maps. You know, you start out with a sketch and you add some information around this, and you kind of build this model, and then you add more and more information and details, and you parse it a little bit more, and you've got an even more realistic model of our Earth until you've got something that, oh my gosh, it's almost like a digital twin of the Earth. But we know that we can always go so much further. And when we sit at this perspective, we can kind of look back at the data and ask better questions and do a better job of collecting data. And really, it's this virtual cycle of data through wisdom, and then wisdom informing the next bit of data that we collect. So that is all the examples that we have for you today. Thanks so much for joining us.
Thank you, John and Keith. I think I speak for everyone when by saying that kind of I was just staring at this with an open jaw, the way you guys are able to, from all the noise, pull out the real highlights. While we wait for questions to come in via the chat, I have a couple of housekeeping announcements and shout outs. First, I'd like to thank the club fellow Martha Shaw for introducing us to Esri And a shout out as well to John and Keith's co-worker and Explorers Club fellow, Dr. Don Wright, who was recently named one of the Explorers Club's 50. And finally, thank you to the Chair of Lectures and Events, Ann Pastor, for making this event possible. Now, this Thursday is Chapter Connect from Hong Kong with Kyle Oberman and Michael Barth Kyle, who will talk about national parks in China. And next Monday, in commemoration of World Wildlife Day, we will present members from all over the world to discuss wildlife conservation with breakout rooms after the program as well. So we hope you'll join. So let's jump into the Q&A. First one, John and Keith, where can folks see and be up to date with all your work?
Sure. So this example of this application that we talked about tonight is available at esriurl.com/vessels. And that will just really is the application that we highlighted tonight. And this is just one example of the work that us and our team are working on that's made available through the Living Atlas of the World. So this data, what we're looking at, it's constantly being updated. The vessel traffic is a data feed that's always coming in. We have similar products that stretch across the board to understand stream flows, to understand COVID impacts, to understand all sorts of different phenomena that are occurring. And that's all available through the Esri Living Atlas of the World. John, do you have anything to add there?
No, that's good. It's a blast to be a part of this team, because I mean the mission of the team is to make cool and interesting maps and democratize it and make it available to everybody so they can explore it and ask questions and visualize it and try to understand things. And I mean, Keith and I are just loving life. It's a great team to be a part of, and it's so much fun.
Agreed.
Great. Next question comes from Kristen Ferry, who asks, have you tried to do the same thing with aircraft transponder data?
I have not tried to do it with aircraft transponder data. I don't think that it's nearly as publicly available, but that's it's not my realm of expertise. I focus mainly on ocean-related data. But given you had a similar data archive made available by some authoritative data source like Marine Cadastre or the equivalent of that in aviation, you could do something very similar. John, have you seen anything? I know you've done a lot with birds, but I don't know about with planes.
Yeah. So in the past, I've worked with enplanement data and data that's made available through the FAA and departments of transportation at every airport in the world, and particularly the United States in my example. They have data for the flight ID and the number of enplanements, which means how many people are on the plane when it took off. And it's quite similar. You don't have to go around as many land features, of course. It's more direct flights, but you get this very beautiful hub and spoke sort of pattern, and it is very temporal. You can filter it and see interesting patterns. You can see seasonal patterns, of course, as people flee the ice of Michigan for warmer climes, typically. So yeah, that it's totally possible, and it just follows the same kind of concepts that we described here of taking point information and processing it to just connect those dots and then categorize it a little bit so anybody can just say, show me this category and show me that category, and then all the fun starts happening.
I've actually seen an app that was built with the to and from destination points, but not with the actual route information in between. So I correct myself that Esri's put together, but it doesn't have the specific, flight lines. In this case, it's more like departing Boston, arriving in San Diego, and a line in between.
Yeah, and that's typically what you'd see, because it's more straightforward and there's not a whole lot of winding that happens until you get closer to the airport. But I'm not an expert about airplanes and flight.
And Jenny Walkowicki asks, on the topic of data democratization, how much of this data is classified? How do you strike a balance internationally between making the marine traffic data available publicly in keeping with security requirements across continents?
So we just take the data that's made publicly available by the authoritative source agencies. So in this case, it was the Coast Guard, NOAA, BOEM, the Bureau of Ocean Energy Management, and they've made these holdings publicly available. There are other AIS fields that come across that they've obfuscated from their data holdings that aren't made available to the public. So some other proprietary or sensitive information that's not made available through this archive. And so we just look at the data as it comes. We look at the citation requirements. We give credit to the source agencies that provide the information and make sure that there are no data use limitations. We do work with sensitive data, and sometimes we understand what the limits are of that, and we would not make that available in a public facing application like we showed this evening. So it's just understanding the metadata, right? You guys, I had to use the word metadata tonight. The data that describes the data to where you can use it properly and make sure that you're not doing anything wrong with it or legally or anything like that.
Keith, you got meta with metadata. It's like second level. That's second order meta. I think to jump on that, generally, so the mission of Living Atlas is to help people who have data make it available to the general public because they want that help. I mean, it's almost wiki-like in the mission to work with these organizations and help them upload their data so they don't have to worry about management and server costs and overhead and stuff like that. And we help promote the fact that it's there, ready for researchers and school kids, of course, and anybody in between to visualize that and use that data. So typically people have loads of data and they want people to see it. And so that's what we try to do.
I just checked and the live stream is still active. So governments of the world haven't shut us down. So I don't think anything was classified. Next up, Seema Mansing asks, where is all the Esri data housed? Do you guys use green tech water barges?
No, I think, I'll take a stab at this one. Our platforms live, a lot of the data that is being broadcast out to our user community are from a combination of Azure and Amazon. So we are a software company. We're using cloud-based technology that comes from well-known software or hardware, companies, cloud providers. And we work with them in order to make their platform better and make our platform better and disseminate this information properly. So Amazon and Microsoft Azure are the ones that I've worked with most frequently. I wouldn't be surprised if there was others that we're working with as well. John just has a server in his room there.
It's giving off this orange glow.
That's how he stays warm. Luna Zhao asks, can you talk about the unique challenges we may face mapping Mars?
Yeah, I mean, I can jump on that. The geodetic representation of Mars is not the same as it is for Earth. And typically what you have is people taking Mars imagery, so imagery from the satellites that surround Mars and missions that have imaged Mars in the past, and you drape it over Earth. You kind of make a Mars costume on top of Earth geodesy. And that has its issues, of course. And, it's not right, but it was like a stopgap, something you can do in the meantime, drape it on top of a known set of tools. But recently, Esri's done work in creating an actual Mars model so that the data for Mars, the surface of Mars, can live where it belongs, which is on the surface of Mars. And that is available as an app that was launched just a little bit before the Mars rover landing a few days ago, which was so exciting, by the way, wasn't that? I mean, I just watched that and you get chills and you think this is a craft that human beings made and rocketed to, we stuck it on a bullet and launched it at another planet that's whizzing, who knows how fast, and landed it and just stuck that landing. I was so proud of us all, even though I didn't have anything to do with it. So anyways, Esri has a real Mars, and it's an app that's available. If you Google, I'm going to go out on a limb here and say, if you Google Esri 3D Mars, you might be able to find it. You stand a pretty good chance of finding it.
Next up from Alex Moore, who asks, a lot of the data that you present is historical. Have you ever thought about creating a digital atlas that can explore even further back in time? For example, you showed 5 years with the glacier, but what about 500 or 5,000?
Yeah, sometimes we work with data that is relatively ancient. So we'll work pretty commonly with USGS data that tracks volcanoes and earthquakes that have been estimated by experts to have, a specific location and a timestamp associated with it based on their best knowledge. And that data really is amazing. It's amazing to see pseudo recent data, but you get this really broad temporal swath of data and you see some really beautiful patterns that start to emerge. And the earthquake data that I just described, when you take hundreds of years of earthquake data and you drop it onto a map. The first time I did this, I'll tell you a story. First time I made a map using all this earthquake data, it was like kitchen sink cartography. Just lob it on the map, make them glow a little bit because that looks cool. And they kind of coalesced into each other slightly because they stacked up so heavily. And I showed it to my son, Bear, who at the time was, I don't know, maybe he was like 8 or 6 or 8 or something. And he looked at it and he said, "Oh, it's the Ring of Fire." And I was like, "What? No, Bear, these are earthquakes." That's adorable, you little crazy kid. Get out of here. No. And he was right. He was more right than I was. I wasn't seeing the first order underlying phenomenon. He saw it for what it was, which is the actual plates of Earth's tectonic boundaries grinding against each other, causing earthquakes. I was just seeing a million dots that I thought of as earthquakes. And he saw the first order structure of the plates of Earth itself. And it was pretty wonderful.
Next up, Manfred Zabraskas asks, manual analysis of this data is super interesting, but I'd be curious to hear what you think are the biggest opportunities with automated predictions and insights.
Sure. So talking about vessel traffic in particular, I talked about these toolboxes that we have that are ready within our platform to use. And they do exactly that. We've got this new term that's out there that isn't a new term for Esri at all. It's called machine learning. We've been doing machine learning.
That's impossible, Keith. Machines can't learn.
We've been doing machine learning, for a long time. It was just called, scripting and algorithms and a toolbox within the platform before. And these tools allow you to unlock those patterns and understand the relationships between one vessel and another, and it'll determine exactly what those relationships are, assign it a confidence, and be able to really let you hone in at that needle in a haystack among all this different data that's out there and available. So I'm really excited. There's these geostatistical and geoanalytic tools that allow you to do it. And if they don't work for you, you can start to bring in some of your customized tools within there as well. We do work with notebooks and other Python scripting within our platform the sky's the limit to visualize these different data sets and unlock some of those patterns that might be happening. And I know John wants to add something here.
Well, I do. How did you know? Esri does have a pretty active and vibrant machine learning team who are building these tools that let you take just reams and reams of data like this and model it and ask questions about it and extrapolate. So if you're interested in that, I encourage you to look up Esri and machine learning. And there's a lot of videos out there for statistical analysis as a result of machine learning and modeling. And if you're a machine learning person, there's loads of cool stuff for you to find.
Next up, James Gong asks, have you seen increased vessel traffic through the Arctic as sea ice levels decrease?
I think the short answer is yes, and you can see that in some of the data. Unfortunately, that north-facing side of the north side of Alaska is one of the locations that has the least amount of VHF coverage of this network. But that was, the traffic patterns are definitely increasing within there based upon what we're seeing. But just remember that, technology is changing too. So towers are getting taller. We're able to pick up more now than we could 10 years ago. There's more vessels that are out there that have these antennas on them that are required. So comparing one year to the next isn't always exact. So based upon just looking at it, we do see an increase in what's going on there.
And there's a lot of data for sea ice itself. And Living Atlas has an app that you can visit called the Historic Sea Ice Extent something. So
Sea Ice Aware.
Sea Ice Aware. Yeah, so check that out, designed by Keith's colleagues and my colleagues. So really fascinating work. So Sea Ice Aware.
And kind of on the display question, David Gianmarco asks, how did you come to the current design of the interface?
I got in touch with John about the interface because I'm a data guy, and I came to him with my goals of what I would like to do from a ocean standpoint. What does the community want to do with this data potentially? And data people usually don't have a user design, user experience mindset. So luckily, I knew that I could reach out to John to help out with the user experience.
And as thanks, Keith. It was an honor to be asked and a lot of fun to collaborate on it. That's one of the cool things about Esri. It's almost like a university or a research institute, ESRI, where people just collaborate with each other and have this idea, and they reach out to somebody and ask for help, people with different specialties, and you can build up this kind of fun team. And I had the benefit as a user experience designer of being able to bug Keith at any hour of the day and say, hey, does it make sense for us to do this? Is it weird if we do this? And he could, give me his opinion as a subject matter expert. Because in a lot of ways, Keith was the customer. And then as long as I could come up with some visual design and interaction configuration that made sense to Keith, then I thought, okay, we're on the right path. And we worked with a really great developer named Jinan Zhang. And together, it was this kind of really interesting team where we would iterate and we would review it and then try something out. And there's so many tools available to make development rapid. So you could iterate quickly and you can make things beautiful. And that's, we used the Esri API for JavaScript for the front end piece of this. And the back end piece is the stuff that Keith described earlier in the presentation. And we would chat with Jinan, and Jinan would implement some JavaScript API visual effect to make the lines glow. And all of a sudden we were like, whoa, this is amazing. It's cool. And there's a practical reason for that too, because you have a problem of occlusion with data like this. So much of the data is heavily stacked that in order to make any kind of sense of it, you have to push back the individual opacity of any one line to only like 1 or 2%. So if 100 lines are stacked up on top of each other, then it's visible at 100% strength. And then you make that whole layer glow, and it gives this sort of heat map sense. So you can see where there is a collection of vessel traffic happening, where the pinch points are. But then as you zoom in, that starts to break itself out, and you can select the internet, the individual lines themselves. So anyways, it was a lot of fun.
And so in the app, we want feedback, right, from everybody. So this app is not done. We always want to be making things better. So there is an opportunity for you guys, for you folks to get in touch with us and provide any of your use cases, provide feedback of how you might use something or how we can make it better. So this is actually the first release of the application. We've got some really cool ideas that we want to incorporate into the next version. And we hope to get some feedback from everyone to make it better.
Well, great. I think we have time for one lightning round question. You can only answer in 2 words. Data is or data are?
I say is.
Keith?
Data are.
I'm not academic enough to say data are without feeling embarrassed.
Well, thank you both. And I think I speak for everyone where we just all really enjoyed your presentation today. And thank you to everyone at the Explorers Club who made this possible. And especially a special thanks to everyone in the audience for tuning in, whether it's night, morning, or afternoon. Thank you for taking the time to watching these 2 great guys. Have a good night, everyone, and take care.
Thank you, everyone.
Thanks.